The general public has held a stereotype of heavy metal fans being suicidally depressed and being a danger to themselves and society in general, he said. But they are quite delicate things. Aside from their age, they're basically the same kind of person as a classical music fan. Lots of heavy metal fans will tell you that they also like Wagner, because it's big, loud, and brash. There's also a sense of theater in both heavy rock and classical music, and I suspect that this is what they're really trying to get at when they listen.
When metalheads think of what a metalhead is like, it's a totally different image than what non-metalheads may think. When I think of a metalhead, I think of someone who enjoys extreme metal more than other music. So specifically metal music, of course. When I think of a stereotypical metalhead,
I basically picture Johan Hegg of Amon Amarth.
So I had to research metal stereotypes for this video. So naturally, I hit up Metal YouTube, and this is my compiled list of metal stereotypes.
Alcoholic, or druggies. Dumb. Satanists or atheists. Depressed. Suicidal. White men. Nonconformist. Angry. Antisocial. Nerds or geeks. Dirty.
So what I've noticed from this research is that it's mostly older metalheads who associate stupidity, Satan, and drugs with metalheads and the metalhead lifestyle. I think this is because of the history of metal and also rock in general, since in the 80s when metal was starting to be an actual subculture, it was still a youth culture specifically. All those classic bands like Black Sabbath, Judas Priest, Metallica were young people in the 80s. Most of their fans were in their mid to late teens, maybe even younger. The 80s was, I would say, the grand finale or the last golden years of the rock star era, and in the 90s it started to kind of go down and turn into something else instead.
Starting with Elvis in the 50s, and carrying on to Woodstock, Jimi Hendrix, Ozzy Osbourne, David Bowie, and countless others.
The public image of the drug-fueled rock star endures even today, while the reality, of course, is quite different. The NSA's war on drugs in the United States and the tough competition of the modern music scene makes it a really poor decision to use touring as an excuse to get high and party. If a musician has any hope of success, a drug addiction will severely hinder their progress. And this goes, of course, also for alcoholism, just any substance addiction. While this was true even in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, the reality sort of hadn't come crashing down on people yet. And during the HIV/AIDS crisis in the United States and globally, I think that a lot of the bad decisions that were already being made sort of suddenly hit their wall. Because you can smoke your whole life and never die of cancer, but with the introduction of HIV/AIDS, risk of contracting the immune disease probably would have scared a lot of people out of doing things like cocaine, injecting any kind of drug, sharing needles, obviously, and unprotected relations. As for the regular Joes, well, if you're a drug addict, it's probably not because of the music you listen to. Since nowadays you can no longer just say that the metalheads are copying Dave Mustaine or whatever, it's clearly not an influence from some metal idol. And with the exception of the devil's fucking cannabis, it's not like most of the actual music is even drug-themed. Now that weed has been decriminalized and regulated in more areas in the world, it's not really seen so much as a drug addiction anymore, at least not any more than a chocolate addiction. Certainly a person can go overboard with all of these things, but it's not going to land you in jail or lose you your job if you're partaking responsibly. I think a similar explanation exists for the metalheads are dumb idea. Once again, this stereotype seems popular with people who were at least 10 years old or older during the 80s. And I think it's because in 1993, Beavis and Butthead started airing on MTV.
What? Yeah, so what?
Following the hairspray fumes-induced fever dream that was the 80s, The English-speaking world came down hard on metalheads, druggies, counterculturalists, poor people, and the gays. Thus began the time when, particularly in the United States, people were perhaps overly concerned with stupidity. Shows like Beavis and Butthead, The Simpsons, and perhaps reaching its peak in 2006 with the release of Idiocracy and Metalocalypse.
Toki, look inside of your basket. Guess what? You're in such a crappy mood. You have ladies' tampons on side of it, and you buy them for yourself. Go have a conversation with all the ladies and tell them your problem.
You lady squishcar!
No, I'm not!
Really demonstrate the contempt and humor which could be found in alleged idiots. While The Simpsons can be read as a satire of American culture at the time, Beavis and Butthead and Metalocalypse just aren't that deep, bro. Though they are obviously influenced by their respective eras. Beavis and Butthead were quite likely the only representation of metalheads in the media for North Americans, who didn't personally know any metalheads, until at least 1999. And Beavis and Butthead certainly are stupid. If the 80s gave rise to the idea that metalheads are drug addicts and terminally stupid, then the 90s definitely solidified the idea of Satanism in metal, if not actually birthed it. The satanic panics caused by black metal and Marilyn Manson, and the conflation of goths and metalheads, served to forever bond Satanism, or at least atheism, with both goth and metalhead subcultures. This leads us into the depressed and suicidal stereotypes about metalheads, which I noticed did not show up as much in older metalheads' videos.
I'm editing part 1, and while I was editing, I was like, oh, I should put in, something that was stereotypically considered to be satanic in the 90s. And I found this, JesusIsSavior.com, talking about the industrial, synth band Ministry. And it's just, it's stuff like this that I live for. One of the most evil rock and roll bands to ever form is a sicko demonic group called Ministry. That's beautiful. I want it on a t-shirt. Jurgensen retired in 2008 after serving Satan for nearly 30 years. So, this feels like it has to be a joke, but I absolutely believe that someone would have written this. This is not music by any acceptable standard. This is like Ben Shapiro writing a Christian blog. Oh my god. I gotta make a video on this all by itself someday. This is awesome. I will, of course, link this website in the description, obviously.